Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The mansion gates opened with a heavy groan as Chuka's convoy rolled in. Beside him sat Amaka, her eyes wide with uncertainty as she gazed at the sheer size and elegance of the place. She'd never seen a house so large, so quiet, yet so heavy with silence. Her fingers clutched the seatbelt tightly, her heart pounding as they drove past rows of well-dressed staff waiting in silent formation. Chuka turned to her with a warm smile. "This is your home now," he said gently. But even his smile couldn't calm the storm within her. The moment the car stopped and the doors opened, Lady Obi, regal in a white lace gown, stood at the top of the stairs. Her lips parted in a forced smile. "You must be Amaka," she said, her voice smooth but distant, her eyes sharp with judgment. Amaka stepped out slowly, nodding. The tension was thick, and every step she took closer to the mansion felt like entering a battlefield she didn't understand. Dinner that evening was a cold affair cloaked in politeness. Chuka had gathered the senior staff, and his tone was clear. "Amaka is not a guest. She is family. My daughter." Some staff members exchanged curious glances, others nodded with quiet approval, while Lady Obi smiled faintly and raised a toast with trembling fingers. "To new beginnings," she said, eyes not meeting Amaka's. That night, Chuka gave her a room upstairs, beautifully decorated and fit for a princess. Amaka sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. The room didn't feel like hers. It was too polished, too untouched. And though Chuka had said the mansion was her home now, she felt like an outsider walking into a palace built with bricks of pride. As she sat staring out the large window, she didn't know Lady Obi stood just beyond the hallway, glaring silently, her heart gripped with resentment that this girl, this reminder of a past she tried to erase, was now within her walls. In the days that followed, Chuka took time off from work to help Amaka settle in. They shared stories, ate breakfast together, and sometimes sat in the garden, laughing at nothing in particular. For the first time, Amaka felt like she had a father. And Chuka? He felt like he had been given a second chance at something beautiful. But Lady Obi watched everything from the shadows. Each laugh chipped away at her pride. Each shared glance between father and daughter deepened her bitterness. She had built a fortress to keep the past out, and now it had walked in through the front gate wearing Grace's face. Though she smiled when Chuka was around, her mind was already at work, plotting quietly. If her son would not see the shame in bringing a girl from the gutter into their pristine life, then she would teach the girl her place, not with words, but with silence, coldness, and calculated cruelty. It began subtly. The morning after Chuka's first business trip, Lady Obi knocked softly on Amaka's door and smiled. "Breakfast is ready. Come downstairs," she said. Amaka, hopeful for warmth, rushed down to the dining room. But there was no breakfast waiting. Instead, she was handed a tray and told to serve it to Lady Obi in her bedroom. Confused but compliant, Amaka obeyed. When she arrived, Lady Obi gestured toward the floor. "Leave it there. I'll call if I need anything else." The tone was cold. That day, Amaka's meals were late. The following day, they didn't arrive at all. When she asked one of the cooks about it, they exchanged a worried glance and told her to speak to Lady Obi directly. Amaka understood. She was being isolated, punished for existing. The mansion suddenly grew larger and lonelier. The staff avoided her when Lady Obi was nearby, but their sympathetic glances betrayed the quiet injustice. Chores were slowly handed to her. At first, it was arranging her own room, which seemed fair. But then she was tasked with polishing the lower staircases, then folding linens for the guest rooms, and later, scrubbing the already spotless garden pathway. "It builds humility," Lady Obi would say with a raised brow, watching her bend over under the midday sun. At night, Amaka wept into her pillow, but wiped her eyes before morning. Chuka would call, and she'd say, "Everything's fine, Daddy." She didn't want to burden him. She had waited so long to know her father, to be acknowledged, and now that she had it, she didn't want to ruin it. So she endured the cruel looks, the mocking tone, and the snide comments whispered loud enough for her to hear. Servants belong with servants, Lady Obi said once to her friend, loud enough to pierce Amaka's heart through the marble wall. But no matter how bad it got, Amaka did not retaliate. She refused to be bitter. She smiled at the staff, thanked them when they passed her water, and helped the younger ones clean the backyard at night. Her humility became her shield, and her silence her dignity. Some of the older staff, especially Mary the cook, began leaving extra bread on her tray, even when they knew they could get scolded. A few others began calling her Little Madam in secret, defying Lady Obi in tiny ways. But none of this softened the matriarch. To her, Amaka was a stain on their name, a reminder of Grace, the girl she had banished from Chuka's life. And now, as her son flew across countries for business, Lady Obi ruled the mansion again. Only this time, her enemy wasn't a lover from the past. It was a girl with her father's eyes and her mother's strength. The hallway outside the kitchen was dim, but the warmth inside was brighter than the mansion's chandeliers. Mary, the elderly cook, stood kneading dough for the morning's bread when Amaka quietly slipped in to help. "You shouldn't be here," Mary whispered, eyes darting to the doorway. But Amaka gave a small smile. "I just want to help." In those few moments, there was no hierarchy, no scorn, no walls. Just two women, one aged by duty, the other by pain, sharing silence and purpose. Amaka would often escape into the kitchen when no one was watching, slicing yams, learning how to make akra, or just folding napkins. She found peace in labor, dignity in small tasks, and hope in the laughter of the staff who whispered encouragement behind closed doors. They all knew what Lady Obi was doing, but they were powerless, employees caught between truth and survival. Sometimes at night, Amaka would sneak out into the servant quarters with extra snacks and sit under the orange tree. It was there that the younger housekeeper, Cunning, once asked her, "Why do you smile so much when they hurt you?" She looked up at the stars, her voice soft. "Because my mother would have smiled too. And because I know who I am, even if they don't." That night, he cried when she walked back to the mansion. He'd never seen strength so silent or kindness so stubborn. The staff began referring to her as the quiet one, not out of mockery, but reverence. In every wordless bow, in every gentle smile she returned, they saw the grace her mother must have carried before Lady Obi tore their family apart. But even with these small moments of light, the darkness in the mansion deepened. Lady Obi had begun to notice the shift in the servants' attitudes. She saw the way they lingered when Amaka passed, how they smiled at her more, how they treated her with growing affection. It irritated her. To her, respect was something earned through status, not spirit. And if this girl, this child of disgrace, began earning more loyalty than her, then the house itself might crumble beneath her control. She had to act. She had to bring someone into the house that would realign the balance of power, someone of worth. And in her next call to a long-forgotten royal friend, a plan was born, to bring a princess into Chuka's heart and erase the daughter he never should have had. Lady Obi sat in the sunroom of the mansion, sipping bitter tea while flipping through her collection of contacts, men and women whose surnames rang with power and lineage. Her pride had taken too many hits since Amaka entered the mansion. She needed to reclaim her control, her status. To her, image was everything, and it was slipping. The very thought that people might whisper that her son had a child with a poor girl, one he had now brought home, made her physically ill. She saw the warmth between Amaka and the household staff not as affection, but as rebellion. This house was built on dignity, she muttered to herself, not on street children and charity. So when she heard that her longtime friend, the Queen Mother of Aruka Kingdom, was visiting Lagos with her only daughter, Princess Zara, her mind lit up like fire. Lady Obi wasted no time. She extended a personal invitation to host them at her mansion. Princess Zara arrived in a sleek black car flanked by silent security guards. She was beautiful in a precise, intimidating way, long lashes, glowing skin, and the kind of elegant stride that drew attention without effort. Dressed in designer ankara, she walked through the mansion like she already owned it. Lady Obi adored her instantly. "My son must meet her," she whispered as they toured the family estate. What Lady Obi didn't know was that Zara's family was in chaos. Her father's conglomerate was hemorrhaging money due to legal issues and failed international ventures. They were quietly seeking lifelines, not just in wealth, but in ownership. Zara had been tasked with finding a powerful, influential man to attach herself to, and Chuka, the billionaire heir with a growing global enterprise, was perfect. She didn't just need to marry him. She needed to control him. Her mission wasn't to become a wife. It was to infiltrate and conquer. Chuka returned from a business trip the following day and was surprised to find Zara in his living room, playing the piano softly. Lady Obi introduced them like a matchmaking MC, watching every gesture and word exchange between them. Zara played her part to perfection. Humble, articulate, interested in his foundation work, attentive to his tastes. At first, Chuka was guarded, even cold. But over the days that followed, he began to open up. She was clever, educated, and seemed to listen more than speak. Zara even pretended to admire Amaka when Chuka introduced her, calling her adorable. But her eyes lingered too long, her smile too sharp. Deep down, Amaka felt uneasy. Something about the woman didn't sit right. But she remained quiet, observing. What she didn't know was that Zara was already planning to take her place, not just beside Chuka, but at the very heart of the Obi legacy. In the weeks that followed, Zara became a regular presence in the Obi mansion. Chuka, curious about her depth and grace, began to lower the defenses he had built around his heart. They had late-night conversations about business, childhood, and loss. Zara played the perfect confidant, empathetic but mysterious, vulnerable but regal. She was everything Lady Obi wanted in a daughter-in-law, beautiful, wealthy, and well-mannered. Amaka, on the other hand, faded into the background. Once again, she found herself invisible in a home that was supposed to be hers. She watched as her father laughed more, stayed out later, and listened less. It broke her heart to feel that she was being replaced, not just in affection, but in importance. Yet, she said nothing. Every time Chuka returned home and greeted her with a hug, she smiled and buried the fear that she would lose him too. Zara didn't waste time getting involved with the household. She began reorganizing things subtly, recommending caterers, replacing old artwork, and charming the board members during Chuka's meetings. She even moved into the guest suite temporarily, citing distance and convenience. Lady Obi, elated, saw her as a bridge to a greater alliance, a merging of two royal bloodlines. But what no one realized was that Zara's father had given her a list of strategic targets, information to gather, people to watch, passwords to memorize. Her goal was simple: get as close to Chuka as possible, then tilt the balance of power toward her family. One night, she stood in the hallway outside Lady Obi's study and stared at the portrait of Grace, Chuka's late lover. "That's the woman whose daughter thinks she belongs here," she whispered with a smirk. "We'll see how long that lasts." Meanwhile, Amaka continued her quiet life in the mansion, washing dishes when no one asked, folding napkins for the staff, and disappearing when Zara entered a room. The servants began to notice the change in atmosphere. The girl who had once brought warmth now seemed dimmed by the cold presence of royalty. Cunning, the young housekeeper, tried to comfort her once, saying, "Don't let glitter blind your truth." But Amaka just smiled faintly. She knew she was no match for Zara's beauty, elegance, and power, not in the eyes of her grandmother, or even the man she now called father. She could only hope that Chuka saw past the dazzle and remembered what mattered. What she didn't know was that Zara's mask wasn't just for Chuka. It was a costume for war. And the first target of that war would be her. The mansion slowly became a palace divided. On the surface, everything glowed with perfection. The meals were lavish, the parties elegant, and the family portraits freshly updated. But underneath the opulence, battle lines had been drawn. Amaka's life was reduced to shadows. Her daily duties were now dictated by Lady Obi and Zara alike. Make sure the laundry is picked up, set the flowers in the hallway. Don't touch anything in the main lounge. The instructions came not as requests, but as royal decrees. Zara would pass by Amaka in the hallway without a glance, sometimes murmuring, "You missed a spot," even if she hadn't. It wasn't that Amaka was invisible, it was worse. She was seen only as something to be stepped on. a blemish on an otherwise polished existence. But still, she said nothing. She had been raised to be patient. And patience, she believed, had a voice of its own. Lady Obi saw what was happening, but said nothing to stop it. In fact, she welcomed it. In her eyes, Zara was doing what needed to be done, restoring order. The girl was royalty. She came with grace, riches, and most importantly, connections. Lady Obi no longer worried about public perception. Now she dreamed of power consolidation. But power, like fire, demands fuel. And Amaka, with her quiet grace and strength, was the flame they were trying to put out. Still, the house staff remained conflicted. They served Zara and obeyed her, but their loyalty remained with the girl who once helped them scrub the floors and laughed in the kitchen. Some staff members even began sneaking information to Amaka. What Zara asked, who she called, what she searched for, when no one was watching. The mansion's walls might have belonged to royalty, but its heart was still Amaka's. Then came the evening when everything shifted. During a formal dinner with business guests, Zara sat beside Chuka, radiant and confident, while Amaka served drinks in silence. One of the guests mistook her for a visiting niece and asked, "Is she your daughter too?" Chuka smiled and said yes. Zara laughed, but the laughter didn't reach her eyes. That night, as she undressed in her room, her expression changed. She paced the floor and called her father. "She's still here," she whispered into the phone. The girl, the one who was supposed to be gone. On the other end, her father replied with one sentence that sealed her next move: "Then make her gone, and take the company while you're at it." The game had changed. It was no longer just about love or position. For Zara, it had become a war of survival. And Amaka, whether she knew it or not, was in the crosshairs. Zara sat alone in Chuka's home office late one night, the glow of the computer screen casting sharp shadows across her face. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked through folders and encrypted documents, financial reports, board meeting transcripts, property blueprints. She had memorized the structure of the company from the outside, but this was her first taste of what lived beneath. With a hidden flash drive in her pocket, she copied critical data silently, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. She told herself this wasn't stealing, it was strategy. Her father's company was drowning, and she was their only hope of survival. Chuka was falling for her. She could feel it in the way he listened, the way he hesitated before leaving her side. But she couldn't risk leaving anything to chance. One misstep and everything would crumble. Her family, her future, her father's empire. She needed full control. Lady Obi, oblivious to Zara's full intentions, was unknowingly fueling the fire. She believed Zara's interest in the business was proof that she was a strong match for her son. Finally, a woman who wasn't just beautiful, but capable. She had no idea that the woman she had welcomed with open arms was using her own influence to siphon secrets. Zara began manipulating staff, charming board members one by one, asking innocent questions masked as curiosity. "How long has Chuka been chairman?" she'd ask during cocktail gatherings. "Does he have majority shares?" It was only when she stumbled across a board document listing Lady Obi as the head of the company, the real head, with undisputed control over shares and operations, that panic set in. All this time, she thought Chuka held the keys. But it was his mother. The woman she had just started plotting to edge out was the very queen of the empire. Zara returned to her room, that night filled with anger and desperation. Everything she thought she had calculated, every flirty glance, every staged vulnerability, was useless if the true power lay with Lady Obi. She paced for hours, unable to sleep. If she wanted control, she'd have to take out more than just a lovesick billionaire. She needed to remove the queen herself. But she couldn't act recklessly. Any wrong move could reveal her entire plan. She called her father the next morning, her voice low and controlled. "She's the one in charge," she whispered. "The mother, not him. We've been targeting the wrong person." There was silence, then her father's cold voice. "Then remove her. Quietly." Zara's stomach twisted. Murder was never part of the plan, but now it felt like the only option. And as fate would have it, The woman who would suffer the ripple effects of this wicked strategy would be the very girl Zara had overlooked, the one she thought was just a maid. From the outside, nothing seemed out of place. The Obi mansion remained a fortress of elegance, with its marble staircases, golden chandeliers, and soft music echoing through its halls. But beneath the decorum, something dark was brewing. Zara intensified her charm offensive, playing the perfect partner to Chuka, while carefully disarming every person who might question her motives. She started attending private dinners with key shareholders, gifting custom items to aging board members, and suggesting modernizations to Lady Obi's leadership style. Slowly, she was planting seeds of doubt and disruption, weakening Lady Obi's image while staying close enough to Chuka to maintain her cover. Every gesture was rehearsed, every compliment carefully calculated. She knew now that she wasn't just after a man's love, she was orchestrating a corporate coup. Lady Obi noticed the shift, but misread it completely. She believed Zara's questions about board structure and leadership were born out of concern for Chuka's future. She's asking because she cares, Lady Obi told one of her friends during a phone call. She wants him to lead, not hide behind me. What she didn't realize was that Zara was not interested in uplifting Chuka. She wanted to isolate him. With every visit Zara made to the company offices, she gained more influence. When Chuka introduced her at a major client dinner, the press labeled her the power behind the prince. Zara read the headline with a smirk. That was the narrative she needed. But her eyes remained fixed on one person, Lady Obi, and her next step was finding a way to remove her without leaving fingerprints. The only thing she hadn't accounted for was the loyalty of the servants, especially those who still whispered Amaka's name with affection. It was Cunning, the young housekeeper, who overheard one of Zara's late-night calls. He was mopping the corridor near the library when he paused outside her room. Her voice, though muffled, was sharp. "I don't care how much he charges, as long as it looks like an accident." His blood ran cold. He waited until the hallway was quiet before rushing to Amaka's room. "She's planning something," he told her. "Something evil." Amaka's heart pounded as Cunning described what he heard. She didn't know whether to tell Chuka or confront Zara directly. But something inside her, maybe instinct or the pain of years past, warned her that this was bigger than a jealous girlfriend. This was war. And though she had been treated like a shadow in the house, she knew one thing for sure. Shadows could see everything. Zara moved quickly. Using her father's network, she hired a rogue ex-security agent named Cyril, a man with no morals and a long history of making people disappear. She scheduled the hit to happen during a weekend garden party at the Obi mansion, where Lady Obi would be most distracted and accessible. Cyril would pose as a waiter and slip through unnoticed. The plan was simple. One clean shot to the chest in the garden after dark, followed by a swift escape through the hedge-lined service gate. No mess, no blood trail. It would look like a robbery gone wrong. Zara even offered a backup plan. If Lady Obi survived, Amaka would be framed for the setup. "She has no one," Zara told Cyril over the burner phone. "If anything goes wrong, pin it on her." She hung up and smiled. Everything was finally moving according to plan. Amaka, sensing something awful on the horizon, tried to approach her father, but Chuka was caught in back-to-back investor meetings. "We'll talk when I return," he said warmly, kissing her forehead. "I trust your instincts, sweetheart, but don't stress." But Amaka couldn't sleep. She noticed Zara behaving differently, more confident, even smug. She also noticed how often Zara accidentally bumped into Lady Obi, offering overly polite gestures and fake compliments. Something was wrong, and no one else could see it. The house staff felt it too. Whispers swirled in the kitchen. "We saw her in the security room. She made changes to the guest list. She's up to something." Amaka didn't have proof, only dread, the kind that tightens around your chest like invisible rope. And still, she remained silent, unsure who would believe her. The night of the party arrived. The garden was lit with soft golden lights, and classical music floated in the air. Guests clinked glasses under the moonlight, and Lady Obi, in a regal emerald dress, floated between them with her signature grace. Amaka stood at the edge, helping coordinate drinks with the servants. Her eyes darted around the garden, scanning unfamiliar faces. That's when she saw him, a tall man in a white serving uniform with a bulge under his jacket. She couldn't explain it, but her heart dropped. She moved closer to Lady Obi just as the man reached into his jacket. Without thinking, without warning, she ran. Her scream pierced the air. "Grandma!" she yelled as she threw herself forward. A loud bang echoed through the garden, followed by the sound of glasses shattering and people screaming. Then silence. Lady Obi stared in shock at Amaka lying on the ground, blood seeping from her arm, her face twisted in pain. For a brief moment, nothing else existed. The girl she had once called nothing had just taken a bullet, for her. The aftermath of the gunshot unfolded in slow motion. Guests screamed and scattered. Wine glasses shattered on marble tiles, and terrified staff ducked under tables. But Lady Obi stood still, her face pale as chalk, her eyes locked on the bleeding figure before her. Amaka, gasping for breath, clutched her arm where the bullet had pierced through. Blood soaked her dress and dripped onto the garden path. For a second, Lady Obi couldn't move, not from fear, but from the overwhelming disbelief that this girl she had humiliated, this nobody she had tormented daily, had just saved her life. It was Chuka's voice that snapped her back. "Amaka!" he screamed, tearing through the crowd toward them. He dropped to his knees beside her, lifting her gently. "Stay with me." I'm here," he whispered, his voice trembling. Amaka's lips moved, barely audible. "I had to she's your mother." The gunman, Cyril, attempted to flee, but his escape was foiled by a chain of coincidences he hadn't accounted for. The sound of the gunshot had reached the mansion's rear gate, where 2 armed private security officers were stationed. They sprang into action, rushing toward the source. Cyril sprinted toward the exit Zara had mapped out, but one wrong turn brought him face to face with the mansion's head of security. A swift tackle brought him down, and within minutes, the crowd watched as he was dragged through the garden in handcuffs. Chuka's hands trembled with rage. "Who sent you?" he asked, standing over Cyril, his voice low and dangerous. But Cyril remained silent, refusing to speak. Zara, frozen nearby in horror, tried to blend into the chaos. She hadn't expected this. Not the gun missing its target, not Amaka's sacrifice, and certainly not Cyril being caught. Her perfect plan was unraveling in seconds. Inside the mansion, the emergency medical team arrived. Lady Obi, still in shock, refused to let anyone else accompany Amaka. "I'm going with her," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The same woman who had once assigned Amaka to mop bathrooms now gripped her hand with desperation. "Don't close your eyes," she whispered during the ride to the hospital, her tears dropping onto Amaka's shoulder. "Don't leave me, please." The staff who had once pitied Amaka now watched in awe as Lady Obi, the untouchable matriarch, wept openly for the girl she had once belittled. In that moment, no one cared about status, wealth, or legacy. There was only blood, fear, and a broken bond suddenly begging for healing. Zara stood alone by the balcony, watching the ambulance drive off, her heart pounding in her chest. Her plans had failed. But what terrified her most was that someone might now begin to look for who had orchestrated it all. The hospital waiting room was tense with silence. Chuka paced back and forth, his shirt stained with Amaka's blood, his hands shaking as he replayed the scene again and again. Lady Obi sat silently in a chair, her face in her palms. She looked like a woman aged 20 years in one night. The harsh lines of pride and judgment that once dominated her expression now replaced by raw remorse. Nurses passed in and out of the emergency ward, updating Chuka on Amaka's condition. "She's stable," one said, "but the bullet fractured her upper arm. There's bleeding, and she's in pain. She'll need a transfusion." Chuka nodded. "I'll donate," he said, but the nurse replied, "Her blood type doesn't match." That was when Lady Obi stood. "I will," she said softly. "She's my granddaughter." The nurse hesitated, then nodded and took her away. It was the first time she had spoken those words out loud, and she felt their weight crush her from the inside. While lying on the hospital bed, Amaka drifted in and out of consciousness. When she finally opened her eyes, her vision was blurred, but she saw a shadow beside her. It was Lady Obi. The old woman had pulled a chair to the bedside and sat holding Amaka's hand gently, her other hand covering her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I've done you so wrong," she whispered. "I let my pride, my hunger for status, make me blind. You were never beneath me. You were always above all of us, because even after everything I did, you still risked your life for me." Amaka blinked slowly, her voice hoarse. "You're my grandmother no matter what." That simple sentence broke Lady Obi completely. She leaned over and placed her forehead on Amaka's hand. "Please forgive me," she cried. "I don't deserve it, but please forgive me." Chuka entered the room moments later and stood quietly at the doorway, watching his mother and daughter bond for the first time. He had prayed for this. Even through the guilt of what he had allowed to happen, bringing Zara into their home, trusting her blindly, being absent when Amaka needed him most, he found a flicker of peace seeing the two women he loved finally united. Amaka's wound was serious, but her heart was strong. The doctors said she would heal, but it would take time. The next few days were slow and painful. Lady Obi never left her side, often helping the nurses clean and feed Amaka. She refused servants. "I need to do this with my hands," she told them. She even began calling her my daughter in front of others. Redemption, like healing, was not instant. But it had finally begun. As Amaka recovered in the hospital, the Obi mansion transformed into a place of whispers and suspicion. Zara had locked herself in her room, avoiding everyone, unable to mask the panic growing inside her. Cyril had been arrested and was being interrogated by police. The moment he realized Zara had abandoned him, he grew vengeful. Under pressure, he began to talk, piece by piece, admitting he was hired, sharing coded texts, and pointing to where more evidence could be found. The police, already suspicious of the party's guest list, began their digital forensics. Zara had used to burn her phone, but her arrogance betrayed her. She had logged in once from her personal email to download the hit instructions. It was enough. Within hours, the police obtained a warrant for her arrest. Chuka wasn't informed yet. He was too busy by Amaka's bedside, unaware that the woman he had trusted with his heart had tried to destroy his family. Lady Obi, however, had begun piecing it together. She noticed Zara's absence, her trembling hands during brief interactions, her avoidance of Chuka, and above all, the sheer hatred she had shown Amaka before. The puzzle was forming in her mind, and it chilled her. She returned to the hospital and sat with Amaka in the quiet of the early morning, watching the girls sleep peacefully despite the bandages and machines. "They will try to twist this," she muttered. "People like her, they think money is power. But they don't know what real power is: love that forgives, hearts that endure." When the police arrived at the hospital to speak with Chuka privately, she intercepted them and asked for 10 minutes alone. "Before you break my son," she said, "let me warn him with love, not shame." The officers agreed. She returned to Amaka's side, took her hand, and kissed it. "You didn't just save my life, Amaka. You saved my soul." The mansion, once filled with elegant pretense, was now being torn apart by truth. Chuka returned home the next day to rest briefly and was greeted by the sight of Zara being handcuffed in the driveway. "What the hell is going on?" he barked. One officer approached him quietly. "Sir, she was behind the shooting. We have her calls, emails, payment logs." "We're sorry." Chuka stood still. The woman he had almost married, the woman he had let into his home, his boardrooms, and his heart, was the same person who had tried to kill his mother and destroy his daughter. Rage, grief, and disgust flooded him. Zara, now exposed, tried to plead. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just needed control. I thought she was just a house girl." Chuka stepped back slowly, his voice like steel. "You didn't just shoot a girl. You shot the only reason I believe in love again." Then he turned away as the police drove her into the night. The hospital room was quiet except for the beeping of machines and the soft rhythm of Amaka's breath. Her eyes opened slowly, groggy from pain medication and fatigue, and the first person she saw was Lady Obi sitting beside her. The old woman looked as if she had aged decades in just a few days. Her usually composed face was sunken, her once proud posture now hunched forward. She reached out and gently touched Amaka's hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never knew," she whispered. "I never saw you for who you were, for who Grace raised you to be." Amaka blinked slowly, confused at first, then surprised by the warmth of the grip. "You called me nothing," she said softly. Lady Obi flinched. "I did," she admitted, her voice thick. "I called you nothing. And yet you gave me everything. You gave me life." Her words broke into sobs, and for the first time, Amaka saw the weight of regret tear down the iron walls of the woman she feared. Chuka entered moments later, a bouquet in his hand and sorrow in his eyes. He had barely slept in days. His mother stood up quietly as he walked in, her eyes red and weary. He placed the flowers on the table and sat on the other side of the bed, brushing Amaka's hair gently away from her forehead. "You saved her," he said softly. "Even after everything, you still did that." Amaka smiled faintly. "She's your mother," she whispered. Chuka looked at her, guilt sweeping across his face. "You shouldn't have had to protect anyone. I failed you, Amaka. I brought Zara into our lives. I trusted the wrong people. And I wasn't here when you needed me most." She turned her head to him, her voice low, but steady. "You're here now." Those words, though simple, pierced through Chuka's shame. He took her hand, and Lady Obi reached for the other. "You are not nothing," she said again. "You are everything your mother left behind, and everything I failed to value." Later that evening, the doctor informed them that Amaka would be released in a week, provided she got rest and physical therapy. Lady Obi insisted she would personally handle everything. "No more maids. No more distance," she said. "If there's anything left in this broken old woman's heart, it will be used to serve you, my daughter." Amaka's eyes widened at the word, daughter. She had dreamed of hearing it for so long. Chuka's face lit up with something close to peace. In that moment, their broken family began to slowly mend. Pain still lingered, especially from Grace's absence and the scars Zara had left behind. But for the first time, healing had begun to breathe in the same room. The woman who once called her worthless now changed her bandages. The man who once feared facing her pain now held her hand with pride. And the girl who was once hidden in the shadows was finally rising into the light. The day Zara's secrets were laid bare was one the Obi family would never forget. Investigators gathered every digital footprint she had left behind, burner phone records, encrypted chats with her father, and payment confirmations to Cyril, the gunman. Her father, Chief Orgy, had long hidden his company's collapse, siphoning money from shadow accounts and planning to rebuild through an arranged marriage and infiltration of the Obi family empire. Zara had been the pawn, or so it first appeared, but upon further digging, she was far from innocent. She had devised the plan herself, and her father merely approved it. She had forged documents to look like Lady Obi was nearing retirement, suggested policy changes to the board, and even leaked sensitive data to competitors to drive down Obi and Son stock value. Every tactic was calculated to break the family apart and gain leverage from inside. But she made one fatal mistake, underestimating Amaka, the girl she thought was just a servant. Chuka sat in silence at the police station as the officers read out the charges. Fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, corporate espionage, attempted homicide. The list was extensive. Zara sat across the room, disheveled and no longer able to hide behind luxury. Gone was the polished royalty. All that remained was a desperate woman staring at the ruins of her ambition. "Why?" Chuka asked, finally looking up. "Was any of it ever real?" Zara blinked slowly. "You were easy to love, Chuka. You were kind. But I was never allowed to choose my life. I was raised to see love as strategy. I didn't know how to stop." He nodded, emotionless. "You didn't just hurt me. You nearly killed my mother. You almost destroyed my daughter's life. That isn't a strategy, Zara, that's evil." She looked away, her silence louder than any defense. Chuka stood, thanked the officers, and walked out without another word. Justice had already begun to fall. Back at the mansion, the news spread quickly. Newspapers headlined, royal heiress behind mansion shooting, Obi family betrayed. Social media flooded with sympathy for Amaka, now widely known as Chuka's daughter and the girl who had taken a bullet to save her grandmother. The mansion staff began treating her with reverence. Even the coldest guards saluted her. But it was Lady Obi who stood before the press and made a quiet statement. I wronged someone who had every right to hate me, and she chose to save me. That's the kind of strength this family was built on. When asked about Zara, she said simply, let the law take its course. That night, as rain tapped gently against the mansion windows, Amaka sat by the fireplace with Lady Obi and Chuka beside her. She was still healing, both inside and out. But now, she no longer felt like an outsider. She was part of the family, not by name, but by sacrifice. Zara's trial began 2 weeks later, and despite her father's efforts to use wealth to shield her, nothing could erase the evidence. Her lawyers tried to shift the blame entirely to Chief Orgy, but digital correspondence proved otherwise. The judge was unmoved. This was not a victimless scheme, he said sternly during opening arguments. A woman was nearly killed. A company was nearly dismantled. And all for greed. Zara sat silently in court, stripped of the aura she once wore so confidently. Her friends, former lovers, and even extended family abandoned her. Her father's empire collapsed under investigation, and his political allies distanced themselves swiftly. With her influence gone and her reputation ruined, Zara was forced to face justice with nothing but the truth hanging over her like a dagger. Her hands trembled as the prosecution played audio clips, email trails, and bank transactions. Her face was emotionless, but deep inside, the truth burned. Her wealth had failed her. Outside the courtroom, a different kind of healing was taking place. Lady Obi, once obsessed with image and power, now made it a point to walk among the staff, and even serve them during breakfast. This home won't be ruled by fear anymore, she declared one morning. She personally redecorated Amaka's room and moved it closer to her own. If I ever forget again who you are, she said, placing her palm on Amaka's chest, remind me, with this heart that forgives. Chuka, meanwhile, had returned to managing the company with a renewed vision, one that included honesty, protection of legacy, and family before ambition. Amaka often sat in on meetings, learning more about the business. You don't have to be a CEO, Chuka told her, but you'll always have a seat at the table. And she did, not because of inheritance, but because she had earned it through sacrifice, patience, and quiet strength. Zara's final sentencing brought closure. 10 years without parole for attempted murder, conspiracy, and corporate sabotage. Lady Obi and Chuka were present, not for vengeance, but for peace. As Zara was led away in cuffs, she looked at them one last time. There was no anger in their eyes, just sorrow. She had tried to take everything and lost everything. But perhaps the most painful reality was knowing the very girl she mocked as a maid had become the one everyone loved. That day, as the sun set behind the courthouse, Amaka sat quietly in the garden with Chuka and Lady Obi. The world had changed. Wounds had not vanished, but they had begun to close. And in the midst of silence, peace finally found its place. Lady Obi's transformation was not sudden, but it was genuine. Days after Zara's sentencing, the mansion grew quieter, but not in a hollow way. The noise of cruelty, arrogance, and fear that once lurked in every corner had faded. For the first time in years, the home breathed peace. Lady Obi began her healing journey by humbling herself. She visited every servant she had once ignored or scolded, apologizing without pride. Some were too shocked to believe it, while others broke down crying. I was blind, she told the housekeeper, so blinded by power and pride that I forgot how to be human. In Amaka's room, which had now been redesigned into something warm and elegant, Lady Obi sat by her side every night, sharing old stories about grace. She never stopped believing you'd find your way, she said one evening, brushing Amaka's hair like a mother would. And now I know why. Amaka, still recovering from her injury, began to smile more often. Her left arm, though in a cast, was healing faster than expected, and her spirit had grown stronger through the fire she endured. Despite everything she had been through, she never once became bitter. The bitterness that usually follows betrayal, humiliation, and pain had no place in her heart. Instead, she became softer, warmer, even to those who had failed her. "We don't heal by holding on to anger," she once told Chuka. "We heal by loving deeper than we were hurt." Chuka watched her, constantly amazed at how someone so young could hold so much grace. He began to include her in more family moments, not just as his daughter, but as someone whose opinion mattered. The staff began calling her little lady, and it was no longer mockery or pity. It was respect. Slowly, the mansion that once saw her as a mistake began to see her as a gift. One evening after dinner, Lady Obi stood in front of the entire household staff, dressed not in her royal gowns, but in a simple wrapper and blouse. "For too long," she began, "this house worshipped appearances. We judged worth by wealth and character by class. I was wrong." She turned to Amaka, who was seated quietly beside Chuka. "This girl took a bullet for me, and I didn't even know her favorite color." The silence in the room was thick with emotion. "I vow to never again treat anyone as less. And if you ever see me failing in that promise, remind me of this child's courage." A tear slipped down Amaka's cheek as the staff clapped softly. In that moment, something rare happened. A house once divided by pride became united by humility. And in the midst of that transformation, a family truly began to heal. The following weekend, Chuka made a quiet proposal to visit Grace's final resting place. Amaka hadn't been there since she was taken into the mansion, and part of her was afraid of what emotions the visit would bring. Still, with her arm in a sling and her heart cautiously open, she agreed. The three of them, Chuka, Lady Obi, and Amaka, arrived at the small village cemetery just as the sun was beginning to set. There was no crowd, no media, just a single bouquet of lilies in Chuka's hand and a soft breeze that whispered memories of the past. The headstone was simple, bearing Grace's name and a verse Amaka had chosen. "Though the world forgot her, heaven never did." They stood in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, until Lady Obi sank to her knees, tears falling freely. "I failed you," she cried, placing her palm against the cold stone. "I took your loyalty and threw it in the dirt. I let pride cloud my eyes, and I punished your daughter for sins she never committed." Amaka stood frozen, watching her grandmother break, until Chuka gently placed a hand on her shoulder and encouraged her forward. Amaka knelt beside Lady Obi, her uninjured hand reaching to hold hers. "She forgave you long before this," Amaka whispered. "That's the kind of woman she was." Chuka then stepped forward and laid the flowers, his eyes glossy. "I spent half my life chasing shadows, and the other half trying to escape guilt," he said. "But you gave me Amaka, and through her you gave me back my heart." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above them, and for a brief moment it felt like Grace was there, smiling, proud, and finally at peace. Before leaving, Lady Obi made a quiet vow. "I will build no statue. I will host no ceremony. But I will live differently. Every kind act, every humble decision, every person I uplift, that will be your legacy, Grace." Amaka smiled through her tears, knowing this was more than a visit. It was a full-circle moment. The woman who once despised her was now bowing in gratitude at her mother's grave. Chuka wrapped his arm around his daughter, and they walked back to the car slowly, with no need for words. The pain would never fully leave them, but from it, something beautiful had grown. Not wealth, not power, but a bond stronger than both. The bond of a family redeemed by truth and love. The next major milestone came when Chuka made the decision to introduce Amaka publicly, not just as his daughter, but as a permanent part of the Obi legacy. The family hosted a private dinner attended by close associates, longtime business partners, and trusted friends. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was enough to make headlines. Amaka, dressed in a soft lilac gown with her arms still recovering, was seated beside Chuka at the head table. Lady Obi stood at the podium and began with a short but powerful speech. "Many of you have known me as a woman who valued legacy, class, and perfection. But I now stand before you to introduce someone who redefined what legacy truly means, my granddaughter, Amaka Grace Obi. The room applauded, and Amaka stood up slowly, overwhelmed by emotion as cameras flashed gently. Reporters the next day hailed it as a redemption story, the girl who took a bullet for her bloodline, and from street to air, the unseen daughter of billionaire Chuka Obi. But Amaka paid no attention to the headlines. What mattered more was how she was treated behind closed doors. Servants no longer whispered behind her back. They spoke to her with respect. Neighbors from the village began to send letters of pride. And for the first time, Amaka didn't feel like she was pretending to belong. She belonged not because of the dress she wore or the money behind her name, but because she had endured what most could never imagine and still chose to love. Chuka watched her with a soft smile during the dinner, his eyes filled with the kind of love a father should have shown from the beginning. Later that night, as the guests left and the mansion returned to silence, Lady Obi knocked gently on Amaka's door. She entered slowly and handed her a small velvet box. "This belonged to my mother," she said. "I always swore I'd give it to the one woman in this family who showed the strength of a queen, not the status of one." Inside was a delicate gold ring, worn but beautiful. Amaka gasped. "I can't take this," she whispered. Lady Obi smiled. "You already have, in every way that matters." They embraced tightly, tears flowing silently. The cold walls of tradition and pride that had once caged Lady Obi's heart had now crumbled, replaced with something far more precious: humility. And in that moment, the once rejected girl found her true place in the family, not at the edges, not as a pity case, but at the very center of their love. The morning of Amaka's special ceremony began with a kind of quiet excitement that filled every corner of the mansion. It was a private affair, no cameras, no outsiders, no spectacle. Just family, staff, and those who had witnessed her journey from rejection to redemption. The golden sun cast a warm glow through the tall windows of the main hall as the household gathered around the central atrium. A table stood at the center, upon which lay the heart-shaped necklace Amaka had worn since childhood, now repaired, polished, and carefully attached to a new gold chain. Chuka held it gently in his palm, standing beside Lady Obi. Amaka, in a flowing white dress that shimmered in the morning light, looked radiant despite the still healing wound on her arm. The mansion that had once closed its doors to her now stood wide open in honor of her strength. Chuka cleared his throat and addressed everyone present, his voice deep but emotional. "This necklace once symbolized a promise I failed to keep," he began. "It was given to a woman who gave me everything and asked for nothing, a woman I should have fought harder for." He paused, glancing at Amaka. "Today I renew that promise, not to her alone, but to the daughter she raised with nothing but love. Amaka, this necklace is not a symbol of the past anymore. It's for every tomorrow I owe you, for every moment I missed, every tear you shed, and every brave step you took." He walked to her and gently clasped the necklace around her neck. The gold chain glinted softly against her skin, and the pendant rested over her heart, as if it had never left. Amaka's lips trembled, her eyes welling up, and without a word, she wrapped her arms around him. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was warm, steady, and deeply heartfelt. The maids who had once cried silently over Amaka's mistreatment wiped joyful tears from their eyes. The cook stood beside the gardener, both nodding in quiet pride. Even the mansion's guard stood tall, arms behind their backs, as if saluting a soldier who had returned victorious from battle. Lady Obi, who once stood as the most formidable obstacle in Amaka's life, now stepped forward and placed a kiss on her forehead. "Your mother would have been proud," she whispered. "But I am proud too, not because of whose daughter you are, but because of the woman you've become." And with those words, something old and painful finally dissolved. The necklace that once marked abandonment was now the mark of belonging. It no longer carried sorrow. It radiated victory. Dinner that night was different from any ever held in the Obi mansion. The chandelier cast a soft golden glow over the long table set with native dishes, silver cutlery, and elegant white candles. But it wasn't the grandeur that made it memorable. It was who sat at the head table. Amaka walked in slowly, dressed in a deep emerald gown, her necklace gleaming and her arms still in a soft brace. As she entered, the entire household stood in quiet respect, clapping gently. Not because she was the daughter of a billionaire or the granddaughter of Lady Obi, but because she had walked through fire and chosen to be light. She took her seat beside Chuka and Lady Obi, who both looked at her like the heart of the family she had always been. As food was served and soft laughter filled the air, Lady Obi suddenly rose and raised a glass. The room quieted. "Tonight," she said, her voice steady, "we honor not wealth, not tradition, and not even legacy. We honor courage. We honor forgiveness. And we honor a girl who reminded us all what it means to be human." She turned to Amaka, her eyes misty. "There was a time I saw you as a mistake, but you saw me as someone worth saving, even when I gave you no reason to." She choked on her words slightly before continuing. "I called you a servant, a disgrace, a burden, but you called me family, even while bleeding for me. For that, Amaka, I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve your love." She walked over and held Amaka's hand in both of hers. "Forgive me, my child," she whispered. "Forgive me." Amaka stood, her voice low but steady. "I forgave you the moment I jumped in front of that bullet." The room gasped softly, tears flowing freely from more than one face. "Because deep inside," she continued, "I knew you were hurting too. And hurting people, they hurt others." The guests bowed their heads. Chuka pulled her into an embrace, and for the first time, Amaka felt not like the girl who had survived the past, but the woman who had healed it. That night, laughter echoed through the mansion, not forced but free. Plates clattered, stories were shared, and music drifted from the halls. But in the center of it all sat a girl with a golden necklace and a healing scar. The girl who took the bullet, not just for her grandmother's life, but for the redemption of a family that once lost its soul. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.